Good morning. It is a rare Richard Bernardo on a Sunday afternoon. Uh, it's about 4:30, and the Giants have won. So I'm a little happier than I usually am, and I think the Giants Yankees are going to be just fine with how things are shaking out. So I thought my wife almost dropped all the forks as she was making the pasta. I said, you know what? I think I want to get a video in that I was going to post tomorrow, Monday. And she said, well, hold the pasta until you're ready to do that. So take advantage of this. You'll have the video sometime today. And I will say, if you can tell from the timbre or volume of my voice, that I'm still under intravenous and every single day, including weekends. And it's not the worst thing I've ever done, but it certainly isn't fun. And it's wearing me out. But I have a little extra boost from seeing a rare giant win. And what I thought I would do is post the video for the coming week. So what we'll do is what I always do. I'll post up a PowerPoint, which I'll bring up in a minute, and I'll also post that same video, rather that same PowerPoint, separately in the same module. And I will also post a discussion question that I haven't made up yet. I sort of know where I want to go with that. But I think as I move through the content I want to move through now, I will be able to think of something that's motivating and so forth. By way of housekeeping, I'm having trouble. I really think this is part of of the illness, to be quite frank. So supposedly the illness kind of makes you addled, or either that or the medicine or both. I'm having trouble with Brightspace. I've been using Brightspace since Stony Brook's put it in place, and for some reason it's losing me. So I'm having trouble with the discussion question posts, and with reading them, I'm having trouble finding a way to email everybody, and that's really bothering me. And I have another professor colleague who's going to help me with that tomorrow. Hopefully, I'll get that straightened out. But I will post another discussion question that will evolve from this talking head presentation I'm about to make to complete all the material that goes with what we've been doing. Also, even to make things more confusing for you, and I apologize for that, is that the previous week's video had a chapter 11 piece in it. And what I'm really doing is adding to that. So you're, in case you say, wait a minute, he posted the same video, this guy. Well, what is he smoking? Nothing is the answer to that. But uh, I felt the reason to combine some new material with the last week's material because of how the syllabus was laid out. The syllabus for this week was 7, 10, and 11, if I'm not mistaken. And maybe it was 11 and 12, 7, 11, and 12, or 7, 10, and 12. I get, I don't like following syllabi, as you probably have figured. And this will be more talking head material. And as I see the course, at least in the beginning, don't let me forget to do this. As I see the course in the beginning, this is front loaded to content and some skills, but more nearly the content. And as good as the Owens book is, I think sometimes it spends too much time in the mud of theory. Much as I like to talk about theory, it's much more interesting to you and I think productive for you to be able to translate the theory to practices that you either have seen, witnessed, or been part of. So this is uh, talking heads. So all I can basically say to you that of material of the chapters that you have expected to have read, and comments and commentary that occur to me from my experiences and from my own research. I also have my fingers crossed so I won't forget. I may forget to say it as I go through the PowerPoint, is that I'm beginning to, today, this week especially, I'm beginning to sow SOW, the acorns for the last assignment. And so all of what we're beginning to drive at now is, this last assignment, this strategic plan assignment. I have strong opinions about how this is supposed to look. And I mean, we're going to begin to give you things to think about as we move through that. When I see you on the 17th, I think, and more likely sooner than that, in succeeding videos from this one, I will get more concrete about what that how, uh, strategic plan should be looking like and give you some exercises to think about and tactics to try out. And I may even turn them into some discussion questions so I can give you more feedback about it. So from this point on, I'm going to begin to get the muscles that you need to make that all happen. I'll think of a few other things as I start talking, I'm sure, but I'm talking too much as it is. So here we go. So I'm going to share the screen. First, I have to set the share screen. Again, not Broadway show here. I'm basically editorially picking and cherry picking what I think have are the salient pieces that you may not understand all that well, or that you may, I think you can benefit that much more from. I want to get my textbook open too, so let's can work with you on that. Chapter 7, in many respects, may be the most important chapter in the book. Certainly it is up till now, in my view, and that would be organizational culture and organizational climate. It's splitting hairs, no pun intended. It's splitting hairs sometimes for some people, but there is a difference, and I want to have you just internalize those differences as you begin to consider how you're going to decide what it is you need to do to create your plan. I may have asked you this before, but if I didn't, or if I did, it's okay because I'm going to repeat myself about this along the way. I want you to create a strategic plan that has to do with something that you care about, something that you think is important, specifically for your school district, although it doesn't have to be your school district. Things that you see that you think either need to be strengthened or need to be improved or need to be started or initiated in the first place, so that we can begin to address it. And could be very unique to your own school district and not at all important to the person next to you who doesn't see that need. And the obvious broad choices are DEI, uh, technology, AI certainly is a hot topic now. Uh, Achievement is always on my mind, but achievement can't stand alone. It's not an isolated issue. Achievement's about student readiness, about support for students and for teachers to have the support, the capacities that they need to effectively instruct. And certainly it's about closing um, the gaps. Now, that's about DEI, but to me, it's so critical. I'll pull it out and make it a separate issue. It's about the gaps. How come there are gaps? How do we figure out why those gaps exist? And what do we do to reduce those gaps, if not eliminate them? And it's easy for me to talk about. It's very difficult to pull together, though I've seen some great research, even from some of my own dissertation students the last couple of years, to show that there are some interesting processes, programs, and initiatives out there that I'll pull into the act as we move along. Enough said, so you should start thinking about that. What is important to you? Something you're worried about, something that you care about, that you have an expertise in and would like to work up that much more. Okay, so keep that in the back of your mind, and we will now comment on the slides as we move through. I couldn't make this work, so that's why it looks a little silly. Uh, More about organizational culture and climate. There was supposed to be a Venn diagram, but I couldn't bring the two of them together. So this is the best I could do with my limited technology skills these past few days. Culture is about, and we talked about this in a couple of different contexts last week. Culture is best identified, measured, assessed, recognized, factored by looking at three premises, according to Edgar Schein. I've mentioned him several times. Recommend his book. Very strongly recommend his YouTubes. The man's passed away last this past winter, I believe, but his YouTubes live, and he talks about a lot of interesting issues about organizational culture. And he basically has said, and we've talked about this with the lobster issue and all of that already, that there are artifacts that are there are artifacts, there are values, and there are hidden beliefs. Senge, and we've talked about Peter Senge a little bit. I hope I mentioned that Senge is kind of a disciple of Schoen, although Schoen would not claim Senge as a disciple, and Senge probably would deny it too on the other side of the coin. They're both out of the Sloan School of Management in UMass. Is it UMass? No, it's not. MIT. And and there are also other theorists that come out of that group that are really, really powerful. Have some powerful research that I like to tap into an awful lot. So there is culture as explained by artifacts, values, and the hidden beliefs. I started to talk about Senge a minute ago. Senge doesn't talks about hidden beliefs, but he doesn't talk about it the same way that um, Shine does. And sometimes I think his metaphor is better. If you do any reading of Shine along the way, or get the book that I recommend strongly that you get, Schools That Learn. He talks about the hidden, or rather the iceberg, that the hidden beliefs is the bottom of the iceberg, the submerged part of the iceberg that you don't see, the part that the Titanic hit, where scientists tell us that I think something like 10% of the iceberg, of an iceberg is visible, and the other 90% is under the sea, and you can't see it very well. And that's the part that will sink you. Uh, so in the same premise as John uses this triangle and puts hidden beliefs and assumptions at the bottom of the triangle, at the bottom of the sea in terms of Senge's thinking, those are the submerged pieces that people sometimes know are there, but will not acknowledge. And understanding the sum, the SUM of those, will tell you what you need to know as you assume positions of leadership along the way, and are able to explain what um, what a culture may be. Owens does a nice job of this in chapter 7, gets into many more nuances than I'm getting into. I think what I'm giving you is probably more than satisfactory for your mastery at this point. But he does make the point, but not as well as I would like, Owens, about the differences between culture and climate. Climate is more nearly about perceptions, context, and ecology. I have a million more stories about this. I'm going to try to keep it down to one or two, because you can relate to climate in certain senses more easily than you can to culture, because it's much more in your face as such. So again, to come back to artifacts, the culture in terms of artifacts, they're concrete, tangible representations. The fancy word is, and a favorite word of mine, is archetypes. The Pledge of Allegiance is an artifact. A diploma is an artifact. Memos are artifacts. Things that you can look at this and show how these are representative of practices and rituals that we make part of who we are and what we're to do. Very quick story. Superintendent told me this story. It's not personal. He had the Supreme Court, this is quite a few years ago, had come down with a ruling that you couldn't have religious representatives speak at a graduation. Typically, a minister or a rabbi, a priest would come in and say a prayer, or at least make some commentary. And the Supreme Court said, you can't do that. So this superintendent, who at the time was, I'm pretty sure was brand new, went to whomever the minister was for that coming graduation year and said, well, I'm sorry, we're not going to use you in the program. And whereupon the next day, the superintendent was visited by a whole bunch of district community people, representative not only of the minister's faith, but of faith in general, and said, and what are you doing? We said, we've always done this at every graduation. So Joe said, well, the Supreme Court said we shouldn't be allowed to do that, separation of church and state. And one of the persons said to him, Dr. Smith, in this district, all politics is local, and we do this. And he had enough sense to kind of uh, permit that to continue. And most graduations I've been to have had uh, uh, some sort of, I'm going to call it a prayer, some sort of comments from a religious figure, representative of the community forevermore. Artifact. I would be an artifact, which also is expressive of the values because they obviously felt this was important. What are the important issues that make sense to you? One of my daughters is a speech pathologist in a rather large district, and for years she'd come to me and complain about how the fact that they kept cutting people from her department to serve the needs of the special ed population under the pretext that there were too many of them. And they were trying to save money. At the same time, they kept adding teams, football teams, to the athletic program because they wanted football up and down. They wanted to be a football power. That's an example of priorities, what's important to them. And we could spend 30 hours just talking about that. And again, we talked about this a moment ago. That would be hidden beliefs uh, are what generates the premises above. Now, I don't have the ability to reproduce the tables, rather the figures on pages 186 and 87, but and I don't ordinarily do this, but I think that the charts, rather the figures, 7.1, 2, and 3, and 4, uh, are great examples of how you can really sort of slice and dice what culture looks like. So broadly speaking, and then you know that the discussion question, which was on of 7.5, I think I keep saying 7.6. 7.5, I clumps them together as an ecology, organization, cultural assumptions, and the milieu. It's a word I never can pronounce without thinking I made a mistake in pronouncing it. That does a nice job of showing you how the subsystems, subsets of a culture interact with each other. Okay, so you work with that idea, the premise of what culture, how culture, is all of what you can describe insofar as that, what we're about. Boy, just sort of another example. This is going to date me, and as if you could date me any older than I probably look. But the old Star Trek, I think even some of the newer Star Treks, Star Trek nerd and Star Wars nerd that I fancy myself to be, was the number one, the prime directive of all the Starfleet voyages all around the universe, were you would never do anything to subvert that planet's culture. That's how important culture is. And so if you would, as an alien, land in another planet, another school to be taken over, you don't change it until you understand what it is. Then you can change it, but not by yourself. Then there's climate, and the climate, in this case, speaks to um, uh, three premises: perceptions, and that depends on subsystems; context, which is very similar to perceptions in the sense, from the premise of lens, how you choose to interpret it; uh, and ecology, that is the world out there, the community, the Supreme Court, laws, government, businesses, how they all uh, become facets that you need to be clear on insofar as how you try to explain what the climate is, the culture is. Okay. Some of you know work in Connecticut, and I'm not going to tell you where. Some of you work in the high school. When I worked in the high school, I know this is not true anymore. Uh, there was at least two faculty rooms, maybe three at the time. There was one faculty room. I'm not going to say where. For those of you who work in the high school, I'm pretty sure it's not a faculty room anymore, where you didn't dare go in there unless you were part of the club. The club meaning it was mostly men. I think it may have been all men. Uh, you had to be a smoker. In those days, you could smoke in that faculty room. You needed an oxygen mask to get in and get out of it. And you had to be part of the club's point of perceptions, which was that everything about Connecticut High School, everything from how they hung the flags to what kind of announcements they did to anything you could think of was just dismal. The worst, everything was just terrible. And if you went in there and just even to just check in with somebody or say hello or say happy birthday to someone, you practically needed a passport to get in and out because their perception of this, by way of the subsystem that they thought they represented, was extremely negative and debilitating to the whole with a W. That's about climate. Now, again, you need to then put these on the scale and figure out that you need to get your arms around both of these premises. It's probably easier to understand more about perceptions, rather about climate, than as you see how I've explained it to you here. So which rules the day? Culture existed as if, I don't want to get biblical on you, but the culture kind of began in the beginning. It was the Genesis. It was an organic Genesis. It wasn't a lightning strike that suddenly made this culture. It was an issue, a premise that evolved organically. Hear that word. More likely than not, I'm going to charge you to come up with an organic way, which is pretty hard, organic way to effect the changes that you would want to strategically plan up the road to uh, change the issues that you're talking about. Because they're grounded in a climate, rather, they're grounded in a culture that's explained by a climate, and you need to figure out how to do it. And just to say, hear ye, I have a stripe on my shoulder, and I hereby declare that you will always think every student can learn. Ain't going to work. Inorganic might work for like a minute and a half, figuratively speaking, but never all the way through. And the question that I can't ask you to explain, maybe this is what I'll make my discussion question. Don't marry yourself to that one yet. The question I may have for this next week's discussion would be, explain an attempt at changing culture in your own district and how you thought it worked. I like that question. Let me do that. Okay. So what's the relationship between culture and effectiveness according to Omen's? Uh, he offers up a lot of good research about this, and essentially it's been distilled. Sometimes we call that meta, M-E-T-A, meta research into four concepts. And I think you've heard these about a million times. And and in fact, you all spoke about these in the breakout that we did not too long ago. And that would be, it was characterized by high expectations, human relations emphases, a high engagement. And by what I call the ICC, that's kind of a variation on two other researchers' findings. A set of group evolved along those three initials, although they changed the second C, they had an A, which stood for affection. I'm changing it to cohesion. So essentially, cultural beliefs, uh, rather cultural effectiveness, is characterized by the three bullets above, and also about the presence of an inclusion premise where everyone is either included, or there are some people who are either excluded or do not want to be included, a la that faculty room I'm talking about. It's also characterized by control, which is what it sounds like. There are people who want to be controlled. There are people who want to control, and there are people who don't want to control or be controlled. How to sort out who those folks are and figure out how you can bring them into the fold. And lastly, there's cohesion, which speaks to what it sounds like, where somehow or another the shared vision begins to, I'm using a pat phrase here, but all people drink the Kool-Aid to some extent. And even if it's grudgingly, will be willing to accept uh, the vision, will accept uh, uh, a set of values and beliefs, a set of values based on beliefs that have given them a new way to realize. No, in action, I notice I have this in yellow. Action research, action planning considerations. Truthfully, I'm going to just drop the seed with you now. Your action plan an act should begin with action research, where you find ways. Some of you, I think, instinctively understand this, where you're going to find ways to get as much information as you can that's valid, which might take the place of focus groups, of surveys, of data analyses. We're going to get into that more carefully over the next couple of weeks. I'm going to show you how information gathering should look. And if you don't do any of that, if you think you know everything there is to know about what that district needs, you're doomed. And so is the organization. I said that's. I mean, I'm giving short shrift to that chapter because there's plenty to read there and plenty of good material to work with. And then we've already done 11. All right, so I'm not going to backtrack to 11, but you had that PowerPoint already in your module, and especially the parts about um, district administration roles. And then we'll flip over to chapter 12. Now, this chapter 12, in my way, is the weakest chapter in this book. I'm glad it's the last chapter in the book. I think it is. Uh, but it speaks to the issue. It speaks to why you're here. So I usually say this to doctoral students. I don't always say it to graduate students. I usually tell doctoral students that if you're not here to change the world, then you shouldn't be in the class. Uh, and sometimes their eyebrows go up, and most time they will agree with me. Uh, you're there to find research, develop research that gives you the answers to some pieces of the elephant, so we can redo the entire elephant. And so it's really, even though even more so in certain senses, if you're taking a district role, a superintendent or one of his uh, associates, it's your raison d'etre. Again, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that correctly. Your reason for being, why you get up in the morning. Are you there to perpetuate high levels of mediocrity or even failure? I know superintendents were fine with that. I'll say that again. Are you there to perpetuate high levels of mediocrity or even failure, to draw the paycheck, get the pension, or to just keep everybody from cutting each other's throats? Is that why you're there? Dad, I hope so, that you're not, but there are some who are. Or are you there, and this is the fancy vision premise, are you there to seek transformative cultural processes to render what your school system is new? To mean, here comes another pat phrase, to meet the needs of a 21st century. Talking about the Bible a lot today. I couldn't find a picture of the Bible of the Tower of Babel, so I'm hoping you know what the Tower of Babel was, the story was. It's in Genesis, and basically it's a story about how peoples of the world, way back in Fred Flintstone days, decided to build a tower to reach the heavens. And they were building brick by brick and working with each other to get that tower to stand up straight. And the heavens looked down and said, "Whoa, wait a minute! We don't want a tower to meet us. We don't want that." So somebody threw down a lightning bolt, and the next thing we do, none of the people could understand each other. All of a sudden, people were speaking different languages, and because they couldn't understand each other, they began to put the bricks in the wrong place and yell at each other and not get along, and the Tower of Babel fell. One of my favorite words, I don't use it often, but here it is. And what we found was that this tower and many districts often is a cacophony of inconsistency. Or it could be a litany of well-meaning but often conflicting viewpoints because no one's taken the time to find out where the viewpoints overlap and support each other and where they may separate. or it could be that they're grounded in a vision of some sort, but hasn't been articulated correctly. It's blurry, and the purposes are different. Pretty sure I've already mentioned to you. Go stop 10 people in the faculty room before they throw their erasers at you. Ask them, what's the purpose of education? Stop people on the street. That's an action research job. What is the purpose of education? I would tell you what I think. What I'm trying to, I think the purpose of education is to uh, create systems for youngsters to evolve the critical thinking skills and human relation skills to coagulate and cooperate, to problem solve and work with each other. That's what I think. But not everybody thinks that. There are plenty of other ways to do that. And what would your response as a prospective superintendent is if you recognize that there's all these cross purposes? How can the superintendent meet all of those cross purposes and not make somebody angry? That's often the reason why superintendents' life span as superintendents is often very short. And so reforms have come into place. Now, these go back sometimes back to Pilgrim times, a bit more often than not. More, I'm talking since World War II, which I know was a lifetime away for even for me. He smiled. Uh, I think we can speak at least identify that there are what we call market-based reforms, and here's some examples of them: charter schools, vouchers, homeschooling, virtual schooling, private or parochial schools, for-profit schooling, competition for funding, and competition for funding. Almost all of these are private enterprises, not public education approaches. Some of you may even work for a charter school. Charter schools are a response to this dissatisfaction with the public schools for any number of reasons. And the state and governments, federal government and the states have given permission in different levels to have people have community members form get charters from the state, the given state. And there's some pretty rigorous application processes. I've been involved with some of that a little bit, and to show what their charter school would look like. And that school would not be beholden to unions, would not have tenure, would get public school funding, but can do things that the ordinary public schools are not allowed to do. Very quick war story. I made friends with the principal of a charter school several years ago. Hit it off pretty well. And she turned around one day and caught me in a moment of weakness and said, would you be on my board of education? And I said yes without even thinking about it. I had to go through a process for screening. And there I am on this charter school board of education. All lovely people. There's not one cranky, nasty, ignorant person. All good people. But their agendas were frightening, achievement-based, punitive to a fault. And I lasted 2 weeks before I said, I think I have to leave. And that charter school is still actually in existence and it's still around. It's doing fairly well, whatever that means. Vouchers are an idea that government will give a certain amount of money to everybody, every parent, and they can spend their money either to go to a charter school or on homes or any of these other things here. That is to say, take your child out of public school and spend it in other places to educate your child. And I used to run the homeschooling system in Connecticut, and this is a long time ago. And maybe I've had 4 or 5 kids all together ever in the time I was doing this who put their children in homeschooling. That is to say, they pulled their kids out of school. 3 of the 5 I can think of pulled them out for religious reasons, and I didn't disagree with what they were thinking. I thought they were right to try, and they had to adhere to the state education department rigid um, approach to assuring us that the children were getting taught. And I remember one parent being very conscientious about it and did a nice job. Kids did flourish. But most of the kids there was just kind of silly. So I would finally go back up to the state and say, Mrs. Smith is not taking care of needs, and these children are being denied a public education, and then they had to go back to public school. But now homeschooling, especially since COVID, has become a much more popular premise. I'm not familiar with the current statistics are, but I know that they're much more prevalent than they used to be, and it's an answer to or a rejection of public schools. We've always had parochial schools, and especially in cities, but as far as I can tell, are all around the country, and they're versions of private schools, and we've always had private schools where you had to have X amount of money, and you were going paying from your pocket. You weren't paying out of public school funds for your children to go there to get a religious education as well as a prescribed education that a state government would expect. Nowadays, there are things called for-profit schools. I have stories about this one, but nowadays there are billionaires who think that they know what schooling should be about, and what they've done is they're throwing billions of dollars at schools that they think are in the best interest of kids, but you have to pay there for the most part to go to those schools. So if you're poor, you can't go to that school for the most part. I'm generalizing. And all this really most of it boils down to a competition for funding, which is why it's market based. And what it does do, in a certain sense too, is put a gun between the eyes of public schools to get better because potentially my money is no, but they're potentially in danger of being eliminated in favor of some of these other premises. There are political candidates running for office who advocate this. I'm not going to say who, but pay attention on that one. And again, what's your perspective? What's your response as a prospective superintendent to something like that? Then there are standards-based reforms. I have more respect for this one, probably the one I espouse, although there's many failures to go with this, where the attempt has been from government systems, state, local governments, and federal support to strengthen and upgrade existing systems, which is what I want you to do your plan about. Now, if you want to do a plan about a charter school, go for it. Just tell me in advance so I know that you're doing. I'll point you into some research directions to help you do that. But in the end, standards-based reformers want to improve what we do for everyone. Again, Bernardo is generalizing. NCLB is an example of that. Most of you were too young to remember that, but No Child Left Behind legislation, which on paper was noble, because when this came out, I want to say the 1980s, maybe a little later than that, 1980s. The idea was that every child should have given all the opportunities they need to pass the exams. Very test oriented. And if the school achievement levels were too low, regional offices were given the authority to close them and start another school where that old school was, and for people to lose their job, eliminate their jobs, and rehire new people, hire new people. New York City has quite a few charter schools. Long Island has its share, and a couple more coming down the chute, I understand. And that's really a spawn of NCLB and a dissatisfaction with public schools. Then along came Common Core, something Bernardo endorses, although it was so poorly rolled out by the government, by the state ed especially, so poorly understood and so poorly implemented in terms of developing teachers to meet these so-called higher standards along the lines of how kids were learning along these international tests like the TIMSS test or the PISA exams, that we had to catch up with them. And it was just a false, invalid approach, not Common Core, but the understanding was so poor that it just withered away. It kind of twisted and turned and became a part of every student succeed. This is out of the Obama administration. And many of you will remember APPR, Annual Professional Performance Review, where in this case, teachers were held responsible for the performance on standardized exams, come hell or high water, without any real explanation about why the children may not have done as well as the so-called standard was. And that met with tremendous resistance from the unions, which you would expect, and also from communities as well. And it's withering away for the most part because it just wasn't explained properly, nor was it rolled out well. It didn't have to be punitive. Now, a superintendent I was talking to a superintendent 2 days ago. He was telling me he can't, every time he goes to a meeting, he gets three new initiatives that are coming out of the states. I don't know where to begin. And he's a pretty sharp person. I, uh, I heard his pain because they have initiatives for initiatives for initiatives, and the bureaucracies aren't necessarily talking to each other. And so all these things get lost in the forest for the trees. And there's whole school reform, which is maybe an amalgam of some of the things we spoke about before, which is restructuring what we do, change what we do. For heaven's sakes, I mean, just the technology alone that most of us have at our fingertips, again, not equally. Most of the training that we have, again, not equally, should remake artificial intelligence pops in, should remake what we do. We don't have to do what we've done for the past jillion years. Why are we doing it if it doesn't work for a good chunk of our kids, and maybe not for any of our kids? That brings us back to my favorite word. How can we future for this? Are we preparing? An author named can't think of his name. I can't think of his book, but I'll think of it in the middle of this conversation. Back in 1960, he wrote a book about it's called Future Shock. Toffler, Alvin Toffler. He and his wife wrote the book and basically said that the world was moving. It's 1960, 64 years ago. Is that how long ago it was? Yeah. Uh, the world is shifting so fast. Things are happening so quickly that society cannot adjust for it. It's a shock to people, to society. And what will happen will be drug use, suicide rates, riots in the streets, was in the streets, because we don't know how to adjust for the future shock. Great chapter in the book is about education, and this is practically the verbatim quote when he said, "The schools of today face backward to an industrial revolution that is long over." Instead of turning around and looking forward to a world they have yet to recognize. Everyone would like a penny for every time they heard what I'm about to say, which is that the short story is that, for heaven's sakes, uh, we're preparing kids for jobs for jobs that won't exist when they graduate from high school, and we're preparing kids for jobs that are yet to exist. We haven't done it, and to continue not to do it with any kind of whole school systemic approach. And some of the answers to that is what we call leveling the autonomy. Instead of working top down, but that fountain I keep talking about, it's much more leveled, where groups of people engage with each other and co-create. Goes back to my own book I've mentioned to you, and co-create the future by listening to each other with new skill sets that you are not altogether aware of, to pull that together in order to increase capacity. I'm not talking about buying more computers for every kid, or even for poor kids that may not have them. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about uh, increasing the ability for students, for learners to be able to use data to problem solve and to create and to create. Now, I would argue for you that that's where you should be for your plan in here. If you say that you're not and you want to go back to something else, I'm not going to argue with you. I might press you a little bit, but I'm certainly not going to say you can't do that. But this is where I suggest strongly that you go for. Now, I'm not saying to go into PS 138, my old school in Rosedale where I grew up, and say you're going to take a grenade and blow the whole school up, and where the hole in the ground is, build it all up again, and we're going to do all these things. I'm saying that you pick an aspect of that and you go and you use it what you think the future demands of you. I like the way I said that. What the future is that demands of you, even if it's a matter of special ed or if it's a matter of discipline, whatever it is that you think you want to pay more attention to. What does the future demand of us? And how would you plan to have the capacity to make that? I like the way I finished that. The discussion question will be, um, I forgot. I wrote it down, but I can't read my handwriting. The, dis let me go back. The discussion question will be actually from 7. Yeah, the climate. It'll be about a climate question about how you think you and other people perceive the climate of the culture that you're working within. Tell us about that. Tell if you think it's successful or not. And with that, I'm going to stop this. I'm going to record this for you and post it up either tonight or tomorrow morning. I need my medicine.